Hey guys, welcome to Fatal. I'm your host, Beth McCarty. I first of all wanted to take a minute just to thank you all so much for everything. Being a first-time podcaster, I didn't really know what to expect, and I've been really overwhelmed by all of the support I've received. I'm definitely going to try to incorporate all of your feedback and input into further episodes. Don't forget to subscribe and review this podcast on Apple, Podbean, Overcast, Podcast Addict, or wherever you listen to your podcast now. Subscribing and reviewing helps to get the word out so other people can also find the podcast, and I would really appreciate the support. Episode 2 is about a case that hits close to home for me. Literally. It happened in my home state of Indiana, just a few hours from where I currently live. I actually traveled this weekend and passed right by the town where all of this went down. Another reason it hits so close to home is because it involves teenage girls, and the victim herself was only 12 years old. I myself am a mother. I have a 16-year-old daughter, and the thought of anything like this ever happening to her, honestly, scares the shit out of me. I do want to warn my listeners, though, that this episode can be somewhat graphic. It may not be suitable for all listeners. I want to give as much information as possible, but still remain respectful to the victim. I do feel that all of the information I give is important to get across the complex and horrendous nature of the case. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy. Now, on to the episode. This is the case of Shanda Sharer. Shanda and her mother had recently moved from Louisville, Kentucky, across the Ohio River, to New Albany, Indiana. Shanda was 12 years old, and she was going to be starting the 7th grade at Hazelwood Middle School. She had spent the last 3 years in a Catholic school while living in Kentucky, and she was pretty excited about the prospect of not having to wear the uniforms any longer. Shanda came home from her first day of school pretty excited. She said that her teachers were nice, and she had already met a few friendly boys and girls. Her mom said that Shanda seemed really happy, and that she had wasted a lot of time worrying about the change for nothing. But just 2 days later, Jackie, Shanda's mom, received a call at work from the school's assistant principal. He said that Shanda had gotten into a fight with another girl, and this was pretty surprising to Jackie because she said Shanda had never been in a physical fight before. So she grounded Shanda for a week because ultimately it was her responsibility to stay out of the fight. And she was also punished at school. She got 1 week of in-school detention. And I don't know if you're familiar with what in-school detention is, but it's basically when the students are placed in a special classroom away from the rest of the school, and all they're able to do is their schoolwork in that one room all day. The girl that Shanda had gotten into a fight with was 14-year-old Amanda Heffron. It wasn't the first fight for Amanda. Amanda lived with her father and her older sister in a little house in one of New Albany's poorer neighborhoods. She dressed kind of like a boy, wearing baggy jeans, sweatshirts, and baseball caps, and she was actually often mistaken for a boy. She was also dating a girl named Melinda Lovelace. Now, Melinda had been held back a year in school, so she was older, getting close to her 16th birthday. Melinda was really pretty. She caught the attention of several boys her age and older, but Melinda had decided that she wasn't interested in boys anymore. After having several unsatisfying experiences, she had decided that she was going to become a lesbian. Melinda was unhappy with her home life. Her parents had divorced, and she wasn't really fond of her stepdad. She spent most of her time with Amanda, and the students at Hazelwood were familiar with their relationship. but they were often harassed for being together. The small town in Indiana at this time was not really open to a lot of homosexual relationships, nor was it common. After spending time together in detention, Amanda and Shanda actually became friends, and Amanda apologized to Shanda. She even talked to Melinda about her, telling her that she was really nice and that she really liked her. But Melinda started to get jealous because she felt like Amanda was spending too much time talking about Shanda. So she actually got herself into trouble so she could sit in detention as well. And while she was in detention, Melinda noticed that Amanda was staring at Shanda. They were passing notes back and forth, and it kind of pissed her off. So after school, Melinda brought Amanda over to her house, and she took her in her room and demanded to see the notes that Shanda and Amanda had been passing back and forth. But Amanda refused to hand the notes over, and things got physical. Melinda actually smacked her across the face and then wrestled the notes away from her. And in the notes, there was some flirting between the two girls, and Melinda told Amanda that she needed to tell Shanda to back off because they were together. But she said that Amanda was already starting to become infatuated with Shanda. And then all at once, it seems, in just a matter of a few short weeks, Amanda and Shanda went from being friends to having a sexual relationship. This was confirmed in letters that were found between the two girls. Amanda, however, was still leading Melinda to believe that she and Shanda were just friends. Melinda wasn't completely blind to the fact that the girls were spending a lot of time together, though, and she thought that they were hiding something from her. She actually confronted Shanda a couple of different times, asking her to stay away from Amanda, and then threatening to hurt her if she didn't. She thought that she had finally gotten through to Shanda when she opened Amanda's locker one day, and she found, it was like a heart-shaped note that said Shanda loves Amanda on it. And Melinda confronted Shanda again, but this time she was violent. She grabbed her by the hair and threw her up against a wall. And Shanda was telling Melinda that the writing on the note was not even hers. But Melinda said that she was a lying bitch and told her Amanda is mine before she just walked off and left her. After this incident, Melinda actually broke it off with Amanda, telling her that she could have Shanda if she wanted her. She was tired of all the bullshit. But after a couple of days cooling off, she apologized to Amanda, and Amanda promised to stay away from Shanda. However, that was an empty promise because Amanda actually invited Shanda to a dance. She knew that Melinda didn't like dances, and Melinda actually already had plans that night with another friend. But Melinda had gotten drunk and talked that friend into giving her a ride to the school so she could see if Amanda and Shanda were secretly together. And when the girls walked out of the dance together, Melinda was livid. She got violent again and smacked Amanda across the face. The fight was broken up by their principal. Oddly enough, though, Amanda left the dance that night with Melinda and her friend instead of Shanda. After that whole dance fiasco, Melinda and Amanda didn't see each other as much. And Melinda even started seeing another girl, hoping that Amanda would find out and become jealous. I guess she hoped that they would end up back together. But it was kind of a double-edged sword because it was making Amanda jealous, but it was also pushing her closer to Shanda. And in a way, Amanda was trying to get even closer because the closer she got to Shanda, the more jealous that Melinda was getting. So it's kind of this is where the whole love triangle comes into play. They're basically using each other. I mean, there could have been some feelings there, obviously, but they're basically using other girls now, other people, to make each other jealous. But while all this was going on, Shanda was kind of busy herself. She was making some more friends, boys and girls, and she actually had a couple of guys who had caught her attention, and she started spending time with those people between classes instead of Amanda. So because that happened, Melinda and Amanda's relationship was on again, off again, on again, off again. And Melinda told Amanda that she could only talk to Shanda when Melinda was around. So she wasn't to be alone with Shanda anymore at all. But Amanda and Shanda still saw each other, still wrote notes to each other frequently, and did that all behind Melinda's back. And it was around this time that Shanda's mother started noticing a difference in her daughter. She said that Shanda started dressing differently, and she wasn't taking as much pride or worry with the appearance of herself any longer. She used to spend a lot of time on her hair, for example. She wasn't doing that anymore. She also found out that Shanda was continuously getting in trouble at school and forging her mom's name on her detention slips, and that most of the time she got in trouble, Amanda was involved. So she confronted her daughter, and Shanda instantly broke down and started crying. And when Shanda's mom asked why she was so upset and why she was continuing to hang out with Amanda, if she was obviously the one dragging her down and getting her in trouble all the time, Shanda told her mom that she was afraid because there were people at the school that wanted to jump on her and beat her up, and Amanda was what was keeping that from happening. And this was the first time that Shanda's mom ever heard the name Melinda Lovelace. Shanda's mom actually hired a tutor for her, and Shanda was seeing the tutor 3 times a week to help bring her grades up because of all the trouble she was getting in at school. She was also now failing all of her classes. Shanda also promised her mom that she would no longer talk to or hang out with Amanda. Although Shanda said that she would stay away from Amanda, though, this didn't keep Amanda from calling her house all the time. She would sometimes disguise her voice, or she would have another friend call and ask for Shanda, and then she would get on the phone, or they would do the 3-way call. So Shanda's mom went to see Amanda's father, and she told him that she didn't want Amanda to contact Shanda anymore. And Amanda's dad said that he would make sure that she left her alone. And after that, the phone calls did stop. And now that she was being tutored, Shanda was able to bring her grades back up. And Jackie, that's Shanda's mom, thought that everything was finally under control. But then she was going through the mail one Saturday, and she found a letter from Shanda to Amanda. It was returned because she had forgotten to put a stamp on the letter. So Jackie opened it and read it, and she found Shanda's school picture inside. And there was a note written on the back that said, "Amanda, I miss you, and I will always love you, no matter what happens. I miss the touch of your soft body." Shanda was with her dad for that weekend, but Jackie thought that this needed immediate attention. So she calls her ex-husband up, and she told him what she had found. But Shanda continued to insist that her and Amanda were just good friends. Jackie now knew that her daughter's behavior changes, her trouble in school, all of that most likely had to do with this physical relationship that Shanda was in with Amanda. And trying to keep it a secret from everybody was causing the extra stress. So Shanda's parents decided that they would actually transfer Shanda out of Hazelwood and into another Catholic school called Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Steve agreed, that's Shanda's dad, that he would increase his child support to help cover the tuition. And after meeting with the principal of the Catholic school, they were told that Shanda could start there the following week. Shanda was pissed. Melinda learned that Shanda was going to go to a different school, and she thought, okay, now all my dreams have come true. This girl's not going to be in her hair anymore. I won't have to worry about her. And Melinda and Amanda's relationship pretty much picked up where it had left off. She started writing Amanda these love letters. They were going back and forth. But little did she know at the time, Amanda was also having secret correspondence with Shanda. Shanda was apparently having trouble adjusting at her new school. And she and Amanda had even found a way where they could see each other. Shanda was going to go stay the night with her cousin. And that night they were going to go to the Hazelwood school dance. And Amanda would be waiting for Shanda there. But Melinda caught on to the plan and she was waiting for Shanda when she arrived. Melinda had Amanda with her, and she made Amanda tell Shanda that she didn't like her anymore, to get lost, she never wanted to see her again. And Shanda broke down and started crying. It wasn't too long after this happened that Amanda's dad found a bunch of letters that Melinda had written to Amanda. And because of the sexual nature of these letters, he took them to a juvenile probation officer. Melinda was told that if she didn't leave Amanda alone, she could be facing harassment charges. Somehow, Melinda found herself blaming Shanda for this as well, and she spent the next several weeks telling multiple people, friends, everybody, that she wanted to kill Shanda. And after that last confrontation at the school dance, Shanda had started trying to fit in more at her new school. She had joined the basketball team, she was making new friends, she even started going out with a boy at the school. She was trying to get away from Amanda. She was tired of dealing with all the drama. Shanda started taking pride in her appearance again, and her mom could see the change. She was starting to act like her old self again. She wasn't responding to Amanda's letters. She wasn't answering her phone calls. She even gave her mom the heads up that Amanda would have other girls call and ask for her, or they would use the three-way calling. That way, when one of these girls called, Jackie would know not to accept the call. She just didn't want to have anything to do with Amanda anymore. And on January 10th, 1992, 4 girls, Lori Tackett, who was 17, Tony Lawrence, who was 15, and Hope Rippey, who was also 15, went and picked up Melinda at her house. Now, the 4 of them didn't all know each other that well, but Lori and Melinda were really good friends. Hope and Melinda barely knew each other, and before this night, Tony had never met Melinda. So Melinda and Lori had discussed how upset Melinda was about what was happening with Shanda when she was with Amanda. And she had told Lori that she wanted to hurt Shanda that night. She even showed her that she had a knife hidden in her purse. The other 2 girls, Tony and Hope, were under the impression that they were just going to be attending a concert. They were aware, however, after picking up Melinda, of the knife she had hidden in her purse, and that she was planning on using it to scare Shanda. So they all drove to Shanda's house, and Melinda talked Tony and Hope into going up to the door and telling Shanda that they were friends of Amanda's, and that Amanda was at this nearby location that everybody called the Witch's Castle, that was close to the Ohio River. Shanda told them that she couldn't leave with them at the time because her parents were still awake and she was getting ready to leave to go to a party. But she did tell them to come back around midnight and that her parents should be asleep then. So the 4 girls went ahead and made the trip to Louisville to attend the concert that had previously been planned. Melinda and Lori stayed in the concert. They listened to the music. They had a good time, while Hope and Tony left the concert and went out in the parking lot. And here, it kind of, depending on the source, in the parking lot, they were either just hanging out in the car talking with these 2 boys they had met, or they were hanging out in the car having sex with these 2 boys they had just met. But regardless, after the concert, the girls made the drive back to Indiana and back to Shanda's house. Melinda had talked about how she wanted to kill Shanda and possibly have sex with her before the night ended. And at about 12:30 a.m., the girls got back to Shanda's, and this time it was Lori and Hope who went up to the house. Melinda got in the back seat and she covered herself with a blanket to hide herself from Shanda. So Shanda had snuck out of the house successfully. She got in the car and they headed up to the Witch's Castle. During the drive, Hope began antagonizing Melinda. She was asking Shanda all these questions about her relationship with Amanda, like how far they had gotten sexually, whether she loved her, things like that. And this triggered Melinda. So Melinda jumps up from the back seat. She puts the knife that she was carrying into Shanda's throat. And then she asked Shanda if her and Amanda had had sex. Shanda was honest with her, and she told her that they had. Shanda begged Melinda not to hurt her. They arrived at the witch's castle, and Melinda and Lori dragged Shanda inside the house. Melinda threatened to cut off Shanda's hair. Hope took the Mickey Mouse watch that was on Shanda's wrist, and Melinda took the rings from her fingers, and she kind of passed them out amongst the girls. Lori went back to the car and grabbed like an old shirt or something and caught it on fire. But shortly after the fire was started, the girls started worrying that it may draw attention of people driving by. So they extinguished the fire, they put Shanda back in the car, and they drove to another location. They got lost on the way, and they had to stop at a gas station to ask for directions. Now, while at the gas station, Tony called one of her friends in Louisville because she was really uneasy about the whole thing. She needed to calm her nerves, she said. But she didn't say anything about Shanda or what was going on. This was a missed opportunity by Tony to call police or anyone and let them know what was going down. So they get back on the road, and at one point, Shanda was made to remove her bra, and Hope actually squirmed out of her own bra and then put Shanda's on in its place. And they pulled off onto this dirt road where Melinda and Lori both got Shanda out of the car. Melinda made Shanda strip down to nothing but her panties, and then Lori grabbed Shanda's arms and held them behind her back. She was egging Melinda on, telling her, "Do it now, hit her." So Melinda started punching Shanda in the stomach and kneeing her in the face. And then both Lori and Melinda began punching her and kicking her. Melinda took the knife and tried to slit Shanda's throat, but the knife she had was too dull to do that. Shanda was actually able to wrestle away from the knife attack, but then Melinda and Lori pinned her down to the ground. Melinda held her legs, and Lori pulled a rope out of her pocket. She wrapped the rope around Shanda's neck, and she began to twist it really tightly. She choked her until Shanda actually fell unconscious. At this point, the girls weren't sure if she was dead, but they knew that she was no longer moving, so they threw her body in the trunk. And then they all headed to Lori's house so they could clean themselves up. Lori and Melinda cleaned themselves up in the bathroom, and then Lori fixed them all something to drink. They went into Lori's room, where she was telling their fortunes, and then they noticed that the dog was barking outside. They all got really quiet and listened closely, and they could hear Shanda's muffled screams coming from the trunk of the car. Lori got up and said, "I'll take care of the problem," and went to the kitchen. She grabbed a paring knife, and then she went out to the car, and she didn't come back for a few minutes. When she came back in, she had blood on herself, on her hands, and she washed them off. And the other girls noticed that they could no longer hear Shanda, and the dog wasn't barking anymore either. Lori said that they needed to leave and go country cruising or something before her parents woke up. Hope and Tony refused to go, though. They didn't know if Shanda was dead or what was going on, but they didn't want to have anything to do with this part. So it was up to Melinda and Lori. Lori suggested that they just dump Shanda's body somewhere in the country. But then Melinda came up with the idea to burn her body. They went to a nearby burn pile, but they noticed that a light was on at a trailer nearby, and they were afraid to be seen. So they left and went riding around again. And they decided that they needed to get out and check if Shanda was still alive. When they opened the trunk, Shanda started to sit up, and she was smeared with blood. She was barely conscious, and she uttered one word, "Mommy," before Lori hit her with a tire iron and slammed the trunk lid. Even after Shanda had been beaten, she'd been stabbed by the paring knife and locked in the trunk of a car, Shanda was still hanging on to life. Melinda and Lori drove to a town nearby, and while driving, they said they could hear gurgles coming from Shanda in the trunk. She was trying to breathe. So they pulled over to the side of the road, and Lori got out to open the trunk and beat her again with the tire iron. They drove around for a while, and anytime they heard a noise coming from the trunk, they would do the same thing. They'd pull over and beat her again with that tire iron. With Shanda still in the trunk, Melinda and Lori drove back to Lori's house, and they were bragging to Hope and Tony about all the stuff they'd been doing, but the noise woke Lori's mom up, and she was upset that the girls were up so late or had never went to bed. But Lori promised that they would quiet down and that she would actually be taking the other girls home soon. So they leave Lori's house and they head to a gas station near their high school. There, they bought a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi and some gasoline. And they filled that 2-liter bottle. After emptying it, they filled it with gas. They drove out to a grassy field, and Hope, Lori, and Melinda got out of the car, went and opened the trunk. And Hope grabs a bottle of Windex that's laying in the trunk and starts spraying Shanda with it, just trying to show off for the other girls. And then it was Hope and Lori who pulled Shanda's still alive body out of the trunk and tossed her into the open field. Tony was in the car at this point. She didn't want to have anything to do with it. Shanda was wrapped in a blanket, still naked except for the panties she was wearing. And Hope soaked her in gasoline. And then she was caught on fire. Now, I was unable to find anything definitive on who actually started the fire or struck the match. But needless to say, Shanda was on fire, but her body was only partially burning. And the girls had started to drive off, but Melinda noticed that she wasn't fully engulfed in flames, so she had Lori back up. She got out and poured the rest of the gasoline on Shanda. She wanted to make sure that she was really dead this time. Around 9:30 a.m., the girls stopped at a local McDonald's and ate breakfast together. Tony was horrified about the way the other girls were comparing the way Shanda's burning body looked similar to the sausage that they were eating. Tony slipped away and called one of her friends and told her everything that had happened. She also called her mom and had her mom come pick her up. Steve Sharer, Shanda's dad, woke to the sound of his alarm at 7 a.m. He was planning on doing some remodeling in the house that day and had some family members coming over to help, and Shanda had actually asked if she could help out as well. So he got up, he put on a pot of coffee, and his wife Sharon went to go check on Shanda. But Sharon came back to the kitchen and she told Steve that they had a problem. Shanda was not in her room and she couldn't find her anywhere else in the house. Steve thought at first that he might have actually accidentally locked Shanda outside, because he got up once in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and he noticed that the door was unlocked, so he shut it and locked it. And now he was thinking that maybe she was outside letting the dog out and he had locked her out. So he went outside to check the cars in the garage to see if she was out there, but she wasn't. And he said the dog actually came hobbling up the driveway. He was dragging his back legs behind him. It was pretty cold out as well, and Shanda's purse and her coat were still on the kitchen table. So Steve started calling his neighbors thinking that maybe she went to one of their homes if she was unable to wake up him or Sharon. But none of the neighbors had seen her since the night before. So Sharon started calling around to some of Shanda's friends, and none of them had seen her since the night before at that party. Shanda's grandpa actually came over then because he was going to be helping with that remodeling job, and it was actually her grandfather that said, I hope that no one grabbed her when she was letting the dog out. 60 miles away from Steve Sharer's house, Don Foley was waking up for the morning in Canaan, Indiana. He and his buddy Ralph had plans to go quail hunting that morning. Ralph arrived at Mr. Foley's house. The two men shared a pot of coffee, and then they loaded the hunting dogs into the back of the truck. They headed towards the Jefferson Proving Grounds, which is a testing area for the U.S. Army. Don had hunting privileges on the acres that were not used for testing. The men had traveled less than a mile before turning onto Lemon Road. There were dense woods on one side of the road, and then soybean fields on the other side. There was a break in the woods, and then another barren soybean field came into view. As they drove past, Ralph spotted something strange. He asked Don if he had seen it too. He said it looked like a body. So he stopped his truck, he put it in reverse, and he slowly came up on a figure that was lying on the edge of the road, in a dirt path that was often used by tractors and combines. At first glance, they thought that someone was pulling a prank, and that it was a mannequin that had been caught on fire. They both got out of the trunk and saw that it did in fact look like a body. And the body looked like that of a young female, wearing nothing but a pair of ripped blue panties. It was on its back, with the head pointing towards the road. It was charred from the head to the waist, and its legs were spread open and bent at the knees. Both arms were up, stiff, reaching for the sky, with fists clenched around what looked like fragments of cloth. Strands of long, wavy blonde hair could be seen beneath a gray substance. The face was blackened by smoke and fire, and the eyes were cloudy and without color. The mouth was open, and the teeth were clenched, and the figure's breasts were so badly scorched they didn't appear to have nipples. Still unsure, they thought it may have been, like I said, that mannequin or a rubber sex doll that someone had burned as a joke. Don actually kneeled down and said that he saw toenails and body hair. So he reached out and scratched the foot. He said it was cold, but soft and fleshy. And then he started to think that the body could really be real after all. So they decided that they needed to call the police immediately. Now, this was before the days when everyone had a cell phone, so they had to leave to notify the police. And after they jumped in the truck, they noticed fresh tire tracks, so they made sure to back out carefully of the spot where they were parked so they didn't disturb those tracks. And when they arrived back at Don's, he dialed the sheriff's office, and he told them that he thought he had found a body. When asked if he was sure, he said that he wasn't sure, that there was doubt in his mind, that it could be a mannequin or a rubber doll, but it sure did look real. He relayed that he was almost positive that it was a body and that it had been burned. He gave them directions, and he was told to wait at the corner of Lemon and Jefferson Church Roads. It could take up to 20 minutes for the sheriff's department to make the trip out his way. Chief Deputy Randy Spry met Don and Ralph at the location, and he followed them to where the sighting was. When he first got out of the car, he also thought that it could possibly be a mannequin. Upon closer inspection, though, he thought that it looked too lifelike to be a mannequin. but it didn't look like any burn victim he had ever seen. He returned to his car and called the dispatcher on his radio, requesting the sheriff at the scene. It was nearly noon when the sheriff arrived on scene, and he had seen a lot of dead bodies, but he had never seen one in such a strange position. He didn't know where this crime was going to lead, but he knew that he didn't have the manpower or the resources to handle such an investigation, so he called the state police and requested a detective and a lab technician. Meanwhile, Lori and Melinda had dropped Hope off at home and drove back to Lori's house so they could wash all the blood out of the car. They used a hose to wash the inside and outside of the trunk. There were bloody handprints all over the inside of the trunk, and there was a blood-soaked sock that belonged to Shanda that they threw on a burn pile. They also threw the rest of the clothes that were Shanda's on that burn pile and started a small fire to get rid of the evidence. Once Hope was alone at home, the events of the previous night really started getting to her. She started to freak out, and she called Lori asking her to come over. So Lori and Melinda headed over, and they found Hope was really distraught, and she told them that she couldn't handle it. But Lori tried to assure her that as long as everyone kept their mouths shut, everything would be all right, and no one would ever know. Steve Sharer and his family were still trying to find Shanda, with no luck. Shanda's friend Michelle and Sharon were calling everyone they could think of to see if anyone had seen Shanda. They called people from the party the night before, along with numbers that they had found in Shanda's purse. No one had seen or heard from Shanda. Sharon even called Amanda, but Amanda said that she hadn't spoken to Shanda in weeks. Steve had put off calling Jackie for as long as he could. He didn't want to upset her, but now that it was around noon, he thought that he'd put it off long enough. And besides, maybe Shanda had somehow made her way back to her mom's house. Jackie had plans with her sister that day. They were going to go house hunting, because Jackie was thinking of moving her and Shanda out of the townhouse where they now lived. Her sister arrived a little before noon, and Jackie went in to brush her teeth before they hit the road. Now, according to Jackie, she said that while she was brushing her teeth, the strangest thing happened, which she now believes must have been a sign from God. She said her tongue was completely black, and it startled her so much that she called the doctor, and the doctor told her an infection may have set in, so he called her in a prescription for an antibiotic. Jackie and her sister were about to walk out the door when the phone started ringing. It was Steve. Steve told Jackie that Shanda had disappeared, and they were not able to find her anywhere. He didn't call earlier because he didn't want to upset her, but Jackie went straight to Steve's house, about a 15-minute trip, and when she arrived, they called the police. A police officer came over, and they were asked to fill out a missing persons report. Steve Henry, an Indiana State Police detective, received the call about the remains that were found on Lemon Road. Now, Steve's brother Howard was actually the region's chief detective, and he would have normally been the one to take that call, but he was not able to be reached at the time. So this would be Steve's first time as lead detective on a homicide case, although he had worked dozens of homicide cases before. So Detective Henry and Curtis Wells, a lab technician, both arrived to the crime scene on Lemon Road. Sheriff Shipley and his deputy met with them, and they all viewed the horrific scene. Sheriff Shipley said the victim looked to be in her early 20s. Detective Henry said he would guess a little younger, maybe 17 or 18. They studied the body, paying close attention to the way she was positioned, especially the way her arms were raised in the air, which could mean that she was alive when she was burned, and her fists were clenched, so maybe she had fought to free herself from a burning housecoat or blanket, which also gave some explanation to the cloth that was being clutched in her hands. Sheriff Shipley radioed in to check for a missing persons report for a female in her late teens to early 20s. They believed she may have been abducted and possibly raped and then burned to cover the tracks. They noticed footprints around the body that did not belong to any of them, so they made plaster casts of those and of the earlier mentioned tire tracks. They also found the remains of a plastic 2-liter soft drink bottle. A radio message came back saying that no missing persons report matched the description given at that time. Melinda and Lori were at Melinda's house now. Lori was watching television. Melinda was on the phone. Melinda called her good friend Crystal. Melinda was crying, she was upset, and she told Crystal that she needed to talk to her and wanted her to come over. Melinda said, "Shanda's dead, and I need to talk to you." When Melinda hung up with Crystal, another one of her friends called, Leslie, to see how the concert had been the night before. Melinda told Leslie that she had done something terrible, but she couldn't tell her what it was. Leslie tried to calm her down and convinced her to tell her what was bothering her. And Melinda asked her, "What would you do if I told you I killed somebody?" Leslie didn't respond because she didn't know how to react. And Melinda told her, "I can't tell you who I killed. I want to tell you, but I can't." She told Leslie that she had done something bad and that she was going to hell. And that it was all Lori's fault. Melinda begged Leslie not to say anything, and then she let her go because she heard someone knocking at the door. Crystal had had her mom bring her over to Melinda's, and she was meeting Lori there for the first time. Melinda and Lori both told Crystal all of the gory details from the night before. Crystal said that Melinda was really upset and crying, but Lori was the complete opposite. She was stone-faced and emotionless. Melinda then called Amanda, and she found out that she was at the mall. So she called the mall and had her paged, saying that it was an emergency. So when Amanda came to the phone, she told her that something terrible had happened and she was coming to get her. So Melinda, Lori, and Crystal all arrived at the mall, and Amanda got into the back seat with Melinda. Melinda hugged her and told her that Shanda was dead. Amanda thought that Melinda was just trying to play a joke on her at first, but she said the way that Melinda was acting, still crying, she began to believe that something horrible had really happened. So they all arrived back at Melinda's house, and Melinda took Amanda upstairs to her bedroom. She hugged her and kissed her and told her that she was sorry that Shanda was dead, that she had just wanted to beat her up, but that Lori went nuts and killed her. When the girls went back downstairs, Lori was eager to show them proof of the murder. She took them outside and she opened the trunk. There were still bloodstains that they had not been able to clean off, and another bloodstained sock that Amanda recognized to be the same kind that Shanda wore. Amanda told Melinda that she didn't want to see her anymore and that she wanted her to take her home right now. Lori started to worry that one of the people that Melinda had told would end up opening their mouths and tell on them. But Melinda convinced Lori that her friends were not a problem and that they would never tell on them. Melinda tried to get Crystal to stay the night that night. She told her that Lori was staying the night and that she was afraid of her and she didn't want to be alone with her. But Crystal was thoroughly freaked out by this time, and everything that she had learned through the course of the day, she just didn't want to spend any more time or another minute with Lori. She told Amanda she had to go home. Meanwhile, Tony was having a really hard time since being home. She couldn't get the image of Shanda's burning body out of her head. She was also worried that Melinda and Lori were going to sense her weakness and decide to kill her too. She was working at Arby's that night, and she was so distracted that her supervisor sent her home sick. She called her parents for a ride, but she didn't get an answer, so she called Hope. And Hope's mom picked Tony up from work. Tony didn't feel any better at Hope's house, so the girls decided to go to a local pool hall and try to clear their minds. They had a lot of friends there, and there would be some guys there that could protect them if Lori and Melinda did show up, trying to do them any harm. When they arrived at the pool hall, they immediately saw two guys that they knew, and Tony ran into their arms crying. At first, the girls wouldn't talk about what was bothering them, but then they started to open up a little at a time, and eventually told the boys everything that had happened. The boys' names were Sean and Chris. Sean and Chris tried to convince them that they needed to go to the police, and both girls agreed and said that they would. But they didn't right then. They went back to Hope's house and fell asleep. Tony actually woke up because her phone was ringing. It was a friend of hers named Mikkel, whom she had also told everything to. And Mikkel had told her that her family knew a lawyer and that she was going to contact him and see what advice he had. She was now calling to tell Tony that the lawyer wanted to talk to her. So Tony calls the lawyer, and he advised Tony that she and Hope needed to tell their parents everything that had happened, and that the parents could call him if they needed any advice on what to do next. Later that evening, Tony, along with Hope and her parents, all went to Tony's house. They had already told Hope's parents about what had happened, and now they needed to tell Tony's parents. Hope's father informed Tony's father that the girls had witnessed two girls murder another girl. Tony's father wanted them all to go to the police right then, together, but Mr. Rippey, Hope's father, refused. He said that they had already talked to an attorney and that they were advised not to talk to the police. So Tony's father showed the Rippeys to the door, and then he got Tony and they headed to the police department. Back at the crime scene, the detectives and officers were still investigating the scene, now well past dark. They were afraid that they were missing something. They were there for 7 hours, and they called for an ambulance to come pick up the body. The lab tech took photos as they were lifting the body off the ground. The hair on the back of the head was soaked with blood, and a pool of blood was underneath the body. They found an injury on the back of the head and a small puncture wound on the base of the neck. The body would be taken to Louisville the next day for an autopsy. When the sheriff and detectives arrived back at the police station, they were told that they had a visitor. It was Sean, the boy from the pool hall. His dad had brought him in to tell the officers the story that had been relayed to him by Tony and Hope. Sean was in an interrogation room with the sheriff, and he was telling the story that he was told, and they were interrupted. The sheriff had a phone call. He asked for a message to be taken, but he was informed that he would not want to miss this call. It was from an officer at the Madison County Police Station, just a few blocks away. There was a teenage girl there with her parents, with information regarding a murder. The girl was Tony Lawrence. Sheriff Shipley told the officer to send the Lawrences over. Detective Henry met the Lawrence family at the door and took them into the sheriff's office. Tony signed a waiver of her rights, and the detective turned on a recorder. He asked Tony if she had anything to tell him, and very quietly she started to tell the story of the nights before his events. She started from the beginning, actually, when Shanda and Amanda had first met, and how Melinda reacted to their relationship. The story unfolded before them, but Tony did tell officers that she and Hope were actually dropped off around 9:45 a.m., and Melinda and Lori were supposed to have then went to go burn the body. This part didn't add up for sheriff or match the timeline. The officers got word on their missing persons report as well. 12-year-old Shanda Sharer was reported missing by her parents that day around 1 p.m. Blonde hair, weighing about 100 pounds. She matched the description of the burned body they had discovered. Officers went by Lori Tackett's house to see if they could spot her car outside to get confirmation on the confessions that they had heard so far. The car wasn't there, but the officer did speak with her parents. Her parents told the officer that Lori was spending the night with a girl named Melinda in New Albany, but they didn't know her last name. Melinda's last name did not remain unknown for long, though. This is a small town, so word got around pretty quickly with other officials, and it had been brought to the attention of the sheriff and the detective that a few months back, a concerned parent of Amanda Heffron had brought a bunch of letters in that were from a Melinda Lovelace to his daughter Amanda. So that time that Amanda's father had contacted the probation officer, and then in turn that probation officer had contacted Melinda to warn her to stay away from Amanda, was now working in favor of the authorities. State troopers were sent to Melinda's house to see if they could locate Lori's car, which they did. It was parked behind the house. They were told just to keep watch for now, because they were working on getting warrants for the arrest and to search the car. Steve Henry's brother Howard volunteered to go talk to Shanda's parents. He was closest right now because both of the parents were still in Jeffersonville at Steve Sharer's house, and he needed to now let them know that they had identified the body and that their daughter had been murdered. Steve Henry was going to be working on getting the warrants together and signed by a judge. So Detective Howard Henry arrived at Steve Sharer's home sometime after 11:30 p.m. Jackie had just left to go home and try to get some rest, with the promise that Steve would call her if they heard anything. Detective Henry asked Steve to call Jackie and ask her to come back, and Steve asked if they had found Shanda. But Detective Henry kind of avoided the question. He asked if he could take a look in Shanda's room, asked some questions about Shanda as well, like what kind of jewelry she may have been wearing, if they had her dental records. And Steve and Sharon mentioned that Shanda had just gotten braces a couple of weeks before Christmas. The detectives were trying to keep the Sharers busy with questions while they waited on Jackie to arrive back at the house. When Jackie did arrive, Detective Henry took her and Steve into the kitchen, where he told them that Shanda was gone, that someone had taken her life, she was deceased, and that she had been murdered. At 2 a.m., both of the Henry detectives and Sheriff Shipley were walking up to the door at Melinda Lovelace's home. They knocked several times before Melinda's mom finally answered. They asked if they could come in and if Melinda was her daughter, and she said that she was. They asked where she was, and Melinda's mom said she was upstairs asleep. And then they asked if Lori Tackett was with her, and she said yes. The detectives then informed her that they had a warrant for Melinda's arrest. They woke both of the girls and informed them that they were under arrest for murder. Both Melinda and Lori were arrested without incident. Melinda's mom did ask Sheriff Shipley to keep an eye on her daughter. She said she may be suicidal. They arrived at the police station around 4 a.m. A paring knife was taken from the pocket of Lori's jacket, and the girls were fingerprinted and then placed in their jail scrubs. The next day, Shanda's body was driven to Louisville for the autopsy to be performed. In the process of trying to determine the cause of death, the medical examiner found that the upper half of the body had third and fourth degree burns. Her left ear had been shriveled by the flames, and her tongue protruded through her clenched teeth. There were wounds on her feet and binding marks, consistent with those made by a rope. A small puncture wound was found at the base of her neck. There were 3 lacerations on Shanda's scalp that appeared to be inflicted by a heavy blunt object. However, the skull had not been fractured, and there had been no internal hemorrhaging. Multiple lacerations of Shanda's anus and anal cavity indicated that she'd been sodomized by a blunt cylindrical object, which had been inserted 3.5 inches into the anus and damaged the inner walls. The extent of the internal bleeding convinced the medical examiner that the sodomy had occurred while Shanda was alive. Shanda's larynx and trachea were coated with thick black soot, which indicated she had been breathing, and therefore still alive, when she was set on fire. The injuries to Shanda's head and anus were serious, but she could have recovered from them under proper care, and in his final analysis, the medical examiner found the cause of death to be smoke inhalation and severe burns. At a hearing in Madison County, Indiana, it was decided that Lori and Melinda were going to be tried as adults. After both girls pled not guilty, Melinda was moved to another facility. The judge did not want Melinda and Lori to be able to have any contact with each other. By now, reporters had caught wind of the murder of Shanda. They were trying to get any information they could, even camping out at the funeral home to try to get a shot of her body being carried in. When the police report was released, it stated that Melinda Lovelace was jealous of Shanda and wanted to kill her because she thought that Shanda was trying to steal her girlfriend Amanda. The report didn't mention Amanda's last name, but it provided the bare outline of the story that Tony Lawrence had told the police, and included the name of the fourth girl involved, Hope Rippey. The reporters went wild with the story of the lesbian love triangle. Detectives were gathering as much information and evidence as they could, and found it to be pretty easy to get all of Melinda and Lori's friends to open up. Not only about the relationship with Melinda and Amanda, but about Melinda's jealousy and Melinda's talk of wanting Shanda to die. Also about Lori's strange obsession with the occult and her desire to kill someone. Within a few days of Lori's court-appointed attorney meeting her, the attorney told the court that he might seek an insanity plea. He asked that she be evaluated to determine whether or not she was mentally capable of standing trial. After about a month of evaluation, Lori was found to be deeply disturbed, but not insane, and therefore she was able to stand trial. Most of the investigation at this point seemed to focus on Lori and Melinda, and they were offered a plea deal. The prosecutor offered each girl a chance to plead guilty to one count of murder, the sentence for which ranges from 30 to 60 years. Neither of the girls' attorneys seemed pleased with the deal. They knew that the prosecution needed cooperation of either Tony or Hope, and at this point, neither girl was cooperating. The same offer was made to Tony and Hope. They were told that if Tony's story was true, and they didn't actually participate in any way, then they would be treated as juveniles. But Melinda's attorney told the prosecutor that Melinda claimed it was Hope that poured the gasoline on Shanda before she was set on fire. So after a month of getting no help from Tony or Hope, the prosecutor decided to bring charges against both of them as well. And he put them in jail. Maybe a little time locked up would help persuade them. When Tony and Hope were seen at their hearing, they were both waived into adult court and charged with murder, arson, battery with a deadly weapon, aggravated battery, criminal confinement, and intimidation. They were also ordered to be held in separate jails, the same as Melinda and Lori. Melinda and Lori were brought in for separate hearings and charged with 7 additional crimes, including child molesting and criminal deviant conduct. 5 weeks after sitting in jail, Tony accepted a plea agreement offered by the state. Tony pled guilty to the charge of criminal confinement for keeping Shanda captive against her will. All other charges were dropped, and she agreed to testify against the other girls. Tony had hoped in signing her plea agreement that she'd be awarded bail and be able to get out of jail, but that wasn't the case. And as the months started passing, Toni grew more and more depressed, and while she was in jail, she hoarded her antidepressants and overdosed on them. She was flown to the hospital, where she lay in a coma for 5 days. Toni came out of her coma gradually and had to go through weeks of therapy after the attempt on her own life. Toni's recovery was assured to the prosecutor, and he continued to put pressure on the attorneys for Melinda and Lori to accept his final offer on the plea agreement. The prosecutor said he would not go after the death penalty and drop all other charges if the girls pled guilty to murder, arson, and criminal confinement. The girls would have to agree to give statements and testify against the others at their sentencing hearings. On September 21st, the day before the deal expired, Melinda and Lori both accepted the deal. Since the girls had signed the plea bargain, there wasn't going to be a trial, but the evidence would still be presented to the judge, as he would be the one to determine the length of the sentence for each crime. The sentencing hearing began on December 14th, 1992, and although both girls had accepted the same plea agreement, they would be heard and sentenced separately. The judge heard Melinda's case first, but said that he would not rule on it until after Lori's sentencing hearing was completed, and her sentencing hearing was set to begin on December 28th. Melinda was brought into the courtroom first. She sat, nervously awaiting her fate. The judge put down the maximum sentence allowed under the plea agreements: 60 years in prison. Now, under Indiana law, Melinda would have to serve at least 30 years before being eligible for parole. A few minutes after Melinda's sentence was passed down and she was escorted out, Lori was brought into the courtroom. The judge gave her the exact same sentence as Melinda. Toni Lawrence was sentenced to the maximum sentence allowed for her charge of criminal confinement, which was 20 years. Hope's sentencing hearing was actually moved from Madison to South Bend, Indiana, by the request of her attorney. He had hoped that distancing his client from the media would help with the influence of the sentencing. Hope had pled guilty to the same charges as Melinda and Lori and faced the same sentence, between 30 and 60 years. Hope was ultimately sentenced to 60 years, with 10 years suspended and 10 years probation. So she would have to sit for at least 25 years in prison, and after that she would still be on probation for another 10 years. Both Melinda Lovelace and Lori Tackett are currently serving their original sentences. Due to Indiana's policy of reducing sentences by 1 day for every day served with good behavior, both women could be released in 2022. Melinda will be 46 and Lori 47. Toni Lawrence was released on December 14th, 2000, after serving 9 years. She remained on parole until December of 2002. Hope Rippey was released on April 28th, 2006, after serving 14 years of her original sentence. She remained on supervised parole for 5 years. Well, guys, that's all I have for the Shanda Sharer case. Now, I have some personal opinions on this case, and I would love to talk to you about them. You can connect with me on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/Fatal Podcast, or just try searching for Fatal Podcast. I'm also on Twitter at Fatal Podcast, or you can email me at fatalpodcast@gmail.com. I've also started a Patreon page. By becoming a supporter of Fatal, you can gain access to early episodes when they're available, along with other cool swag, which are listed on the page. Just go to patreon.com/fatalpodcast. Don't forget to subscribe and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next week on Fatal.